USSR 1969. The city of Dnepropetrovsk is a major industrial center of the Ukrainian Republic. It was here that a story happened that shocked the whole city. A handsome young man was an active worker at a defense plant during the day, and in the evening, he robbed, raped, and killed women. He terrified the residents of Dnepropetrovsk. The maniac committed his first attack in 1969. He ambushed a woman who was returning home late at night and attacked her from behind. Tearing off the victim's headscarf, Berlizov began to strike her until she lost consciousness, and then raped and took some personal belongings from the victim. The stolen items had no material value. He did not finish off the victim, reasoning that the woman had not seen him, and therefore would not be able to identify him. The criminal continued to use this scheme, repeatedly attacking women walking alone through the dark streets of Dnepropetrovsk. But the maniac took long pauses between the attacks, and therefore the police did not connect them in one episode at first. In addition, not all victims of the rapist contacted law enforcement agencies. They didn't want publicity because it was a disgrace. Nevertheless, almost 2 years later, the police realized that the same criminal was attacking women in Dnepropetrovsk. He began to go out hunting more often. In addition, he began to kill during one of the attacks. The maniac noticed that the woman had regained consciousness and was looking at him. The victim had no chance of survival. He strangled her out of fear that she would be able to describe him. After this incident, the maniac began to kill everyone who could see his face during the attack. The young man accompanied the girl. The night robber was walking behind them. He heard the young men arguing. The girl got offended and told the guy to leave her alone. He turned around and left. Her house was only a few steps away. "Well, bird, you've been pleasing one, now please me." The girl heard a voice from the darkness. The next morning, the janitor found the corpse of the girl who was being bullied by the maniac on the table. That day, a print shop worker was rushing to her dorm room to change clothes and go to work at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. As soon as she entered the room, the bandit who was following her attacked her. Strangulation. Robbery. But what to take? The girl has no money or valuables. The most expensive thing in the room was a color TV. Expertly, Alexander Berlizov took scarce, expensive bundles out of the TV and took them with him. The Dnepropetrovsk police tried to hide that they were investigating a series of rapes and murders. But despite this, panic began in the city. Scary stories about a mysterious criminal, who was dubbed the Night Demon, went from house to house, and women tried not to go out alone in the dark unless necessary. It got to the point that the Dnepropetrovsk factories revised the schedules and canceled the second and third shifts for women. Now the women worked only during the day, and after work they were met and escorted home by loved ones. Residents of the city flooded the party and Soviet authorities with complaints about the inaction of the police, although the guards worked hard. Operatives and district police officers checked all former prisoners of Dnepropetrovsk who had convictions for rape. All the homeless people of the city have come under police inspection. But all efforts were fruitless. But the maniac continued to attack. As it turned out later, the criminal led an operational detachment of employees of the Yosmash plant, who, along with police officers, patrolled the streets and sat in ambush. Therefore, he was aware of the police activities in his case. And this allowed the maniac to slip away from the detectives time after time. the police have increased their patrols of the city streets as much as possible in the evening and at night, and also checked all the nooks, attics, and basements. Police officers and volunteer girls from the Komsomol organization specially walked around Dnipropetrovsk at night. This is how the police tried to catch the night demon in parks and squares. There were rumors around the city that even some operatives disguised themselves as women for these purposes. They watched the Maniac all night long, but there was no resulting. It was as if he had sunk into the ground. The night demon is hiding. The Maniac, working with the police, was well aware of the patrol routes and the policewomen as decoys, and therefore decided to lay low. The operation to capture him failed. Almost immediately after that, a new attack took place in the city, the victim of which was a young woman. She was raped and killed. The night demon seemed to mock the detectives. The Maniac clearly studied the basics of criminology. He knew how to hide his track saw. He tried not to leave shoe prints, collected cigarette butts, carefully wiped off traces of semen, and never spat at crime scenes. He was afraid that seminal fluid and saliva could become biological evidence against him. But one day the night demon still made a mistake. There were traces of his shoes on the freshly fallen snow, and he was wearing expensive German boots that were sold in Dnipropetrovsk in a very small batch. However, this detail did not help the police at first, because no one was asked for passport information when buying shoes. The investigators noticed that each victim of the Maniac was missing something from his personal belongings. The detectives assumed that the night demon would try to sell the stolen goods through the city's thrift stores, so these stores were put under surveillance. But this maneuver was not successful either. Meanwhile, the Maniac changed tactics. Knowing that the police were hunting him at night, he decided to attack during the day for the first time. An engineer lived with his wife and 6-month-old daughter in one of the rooms of the dormitory for factory employees. The engineer was at work during the day. The door was unlocked. The Maniac quietly entered the room and attacked the woman as many times before. He strangled the victim unconscious and raped her. But when the criminal was about to leave, the child woke up and started crying. The child's scream brought his mother to consciousness, but, fortunately, she did not give herself away, but only slightly opened her eyes. Nevertheless, the woman saw the Maniac's face and remembered it forever. Soon, the police arrived at the dormitory. When they realized that the woman was the first to see the face of the night demon and survive, they tried to make a sketch of the suspect based on her words. This failed, but the victim assured the operatives that she would be able to identify the Maniac if she saw him in person. That evening, a girl got on the trolleybus. She was on her way home. Soon a young man got on the same trolleybus. He turned his attention to the girl. The girl noticed his gaze, and she began to examine him more closely. At the bus stop, the girl got off the trolleybus and went to the hostel where she lived. The Maniac also went after her, caught up with her and began to strangle her, knocking her to the ground. But this girl is still alive. It was she who gave the investigators a fairly accurate verbal portrait of the bandit and described his clothes. A sketch of the criminal was compiled. After that, all employees of the police and the Secret Service of the KGB of Dnipropetrovsk received guidance on the Maniac. They received a command to find a young, tall man with slightly curly hair in a gray-brown jacket with a flap. Some police officers were on duty at the factories of the city. Soon, a policeman on duty at the entrance of the secret Yusmash plant noticed a man who entered the plant, who looked like a wanted man and, importantly, was wearing a jacket with a flap on the back and foreign high-platform shoes. Meanwhile, confident in his elusiveness, the maniac was not going to leave the city and continued to calmly go to work. The detectives set up surveillance on him and soon became convinced that's exactly who they're looking for. The perpetrator didn't just look like a sketch. He was wearing the same shoes, the marks of which were left at one of the crime scenes. The investigators applied to the regional prosecutor for a warrant to arrest the suspect, but suddenly they faced a problem. The prosecutor refused to believe that such a respected man as Alexander Berlizov could be a criminal. He was the head of a squad of police volunteers and a unique specialist, the star, of a secret factory that produced secret weapons. All the people who worked at the factory were necessarily checked by KGB security personnel. However, the prosecutor nevertheless allowed a search of his apartment. This was enough to confirm the detective's suspicions. As it turned out, Berlizov kept another trophy under his mattress, a collection of poetry belonging to one of the victims. The detectives were untying the maniac simply did not have time to take the book to his trophy room, which he set up at his parents' house in another area. But the police were able to conduct searches even in the house of Berlizov's parents. In his parents' house, the maniac carefully kept everything stolen from his victims: lipstick, handbags, mirrors, combs, jewelry, underwear. Detectives found the gold rings of the victims, the watch of a young mother who miraculously survived, and the details of a color TV belonging to a printing company employee. What pushed Alexander Berlizov onto the path of violence and murder has remained a mystery. Most likely, like many other maniacs, the young man had difficulty communicating with the opposite sex. In any case, during the period when Berlizov committed his crimes, he had no relations with girls. After graduating from college, the young man got a job as an electrician at the USMASH plant in Dnipropetrovsk, which was famous for the production of rocket and space technology. For Alexander Berlizov, this was an undoubted successing. Not everyone was hired at the secret plant. All candidates were thoroughly vetted. While working at the USMASH plant, Berlizov showed activity and leadership qualities. At the age of 18, the young worker became the head of the Komsomol organization of one of the workshops. At the same time, Berlizov became interested in criminology, studied the practice of investigating various criminal cases, and even joined the factory's operational squad, whose members actively helped the police catch criminals. That's why the maniac was sitting in ambush with the police and laughing at them. In 1972, the general director of USMASH announced that whoever found the rapist would receive a 4-room apartment. Policeman Savenko, who discovered the criminal at the factory entrance, received the promised apartment as a gift and was also promoted in rank. Alexander Berlizov was detained right during his shift at the factory. To prevent the maniac from escaping, the most experienced operational staff were sent to capture him, assisted by the plant's own security convoy. At first, Alexander denied it as much as he could. He was sure that the investigators would not prove anything, that he was elusive. But after the personal belongings of the victims were found in his parents' apartment, he changed his mind and began to confess. In total, he confessed to 42 rapes and 9 murders. In the newspaper Dniprovskaya Pravda in March 1974, a large article was published with the headline WROL. Alexander Berlizov, who initially laughed at the investigators, assured the investigators that he realized his guilt and would never return to the criminal path. Although deep down, The night demon understood his only chance to avoid capital punishment is a psychiatric examination and a declaration of insanity. But Alexander Berlizov hoped in vain. Psychiatrists unanimously came to the conclusion that the accused was sane and aware of what he was doing. After such a medical report, the verdict of the court, the death penalty, did not surprise anyone. The defendant was found guilty of 9 murders and 42 rapes. Alexander Berlizov was shot in the summer of 1974 in the Dnipropetrovsk pre-trial detention center. P.S. The death penalty was abolished in Ukraine in 2000. Ukraine carried out its last execution in 1997. In general, the night demon can be called a fairly classic maniac. He killed because of sexual dysfunction, getting satisfaction from violence, took trophies from each of the victims, was careful and accurate, which allowed him to avoid capture for quite a long time. It is curious that Alexander Berlizov did not have a personal life as such. His acquaintances later said that the criminal had a youthful crush at the age of 17, but a girl named Maria rejected the young man for some reason. After that, the man remained single for the rest of his life. It is very likely that his terrible crimes were revenge for the entire female sex. But who knows?
Thank you for watching the video. To support the channel, subscribe, like, and leave comments. Stay tuned for new stories.